We are on recording both. Rick, how's it going?
Hey, good. How are you?
Day 2 of our exploration of Lear Earl, a devised piece, a hybrid media piece. What do we call them nowadays? There's so many hypey words out there that, I'd rather join them than beat them. So the Metaverse is something people understand around the world. I understood my Korean colleagues came over and said there's a place of Metaverse studies at Sogang College. And I say, well, there it is. At least you're not killing yourself explaining what you're trying to do. We're trying to do a mixed media piece. That's the old 90s word for it. Now it's XR, experience, extended reality. Zuckerberg calls it meta, Metaverse. We're just trying to get back in the Japanese sense of things, put things in and start removing them until the thing doesn't make sense. Certainly I'm a big fan of Simon McBurney, who uses, you come away from the performance, you say, this piece would be a lot less without the technology.
Right.
It was amazing, the encounter where you wore the ambisonic directional earpieces in the whole audience, which explained his story about an encounter with an Amazon tribe that uses telepathy, and it's like suddenly McBurney's on stage talking to me alone. So this is a use of technology. In all of these lectures, we're talking about the why to and the how to. Well, we'll change off these roles, but why are we? What did we determine yesterday?
Well, one of the big things that came up as we were working was this notion of the metaverse and having the Buick, the car that Earl was driving, as this center of this metaverse, which is a mobile metaverse that can go from place to place. But the people in that car and going aren't really going anywhere. They're just taking their reality and just moving it to another location. But they haven't actually gone anywhere. They haven't journeyed anywhere. They haven't changed. They're in a stasis.
Which might be similar. We're trying to draw these similarities. We're taking Lear, Elizabethan drama about a 13th century. We got these Metaverse, the Russian dolls, stories inside of stories. About a 13th century king, but ostensibly it's about what should the English Empire do now that Elizabeth is dying or dead or, and of course they come to the horrible Jacobean wars and, the conflict between Catholics and Protestants, and more about the behaviors behind that. Malvolio is the perfect sort of representation of the puritanical aspect that a lot of Shakespeare and company did not like. It cuts out the sensuality. So we transpose that with Rick's father, this kind of biography, metaverse studies of Rick's father, coming out of a very defined era, the Eisenhower era America, where basically, and boomers are representative of the offspring of that era. America was, in terms of GDP, top of their game. So this individual Earl is placed within that system in the sense that Lear is placed in the Elizabethan system. So let's get back to these transporting things, because actually the kind of respect or the necessity or the need of cars and automobiles by the younger generations, hi gang, is a lot lower than our generation. So talk about cars and fetishes, or cars and narratives.
Well, yeah, this is, we were just talking about this the other day. Why is anyone driving here in New York City, for example? There's absolutely no reason for it, really. There's so many alternatives, and also, environmental destruction and all this sort of thing. Gas prices out of control.
$6-7 a gallon by the end of the summer.
Yeah, it's already up to $5. And the fact that the war in Ukraine actually has literally upped that game too, especially for Russian oil production, that being cut off. We actually went back to OPEC. We went back to Saudi Arabia saying, oh, please forgive us for all our judgment of you, but we need your oil, basically.
Right.
So, there's this notion of why are we clinging on to this past anachronism of car as we're looking at it here, not only metaverse, but for like a guy in the Eisenhower era, this was kind of your den. This was your place of sanctuary. This is a place where you were your own man, and you had control over it. You were the driver, literally. And your family was dependent on you. I know in my mother's generation, she didn't even learn how to drive till she was 40, until she was divorced from my father. He was the driver.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, and that's in so she was 40-ish, and so that's like the early 60s. So it wasn't exactly like, it was moving out of the Eisenhower era into the Kennedy era.
The young, hip, the guys, the real winners of spoils of war, i.e. Kennedy, the PT boat commander.
Absolutely, and the rise of Hugh Hefner and his whole ideology of the sort of, the playboy.
Man of leisure.
Yeah, exactly. It juxtaposed with this very rigid, I think bringing up Malvolio is really interesting, because this idea that you're coming out of World War II with this kind of puritanical idea of a working middle-class guy working spoils of war being his house, his car, his family. These were the things that you were rewarded with, but they don't have any value in and of themselves. They're just what you're supposed to have. It's not a choice. It's not you're looking for something. You're being given something as the alternative. And then, of course, the GDP you mentioned, all the folks coming out of World War II, we made our money off of war machines, and Boeing and Lockheed exploded as companies. They're still doing this. Anytime there's a need to bump up the GDP of the U.S., we go to war, and here we have it right now in Ukraine. We're gearing up to
another proxy war. The way Syria, the way Afghanistan, the way Iraq.
And ironically, or maybe not so ironically, it's Russia again. And Russia was involved in Vietnam. Russia was involved in Afghanistan. Russia was involved in Iraq. So first, right? So it's this notion, and especially
pedagogically, they're not even communist anymore.
Well, exactly.
So they're hyper-capitalists more than China.
More than we are. Almost.
It's a type of disciplinary surveillance capitalism that, in case of Russia, their Freakonomics are more like gangster capitalism,
right?
Where the oligarchs have taken the lion's share of production. I mean, at least we forget they have the GDP of Italy. Right. So they're not a very, California is the fourth richest country on earth, if we have to talk about GDP. So let's get back to what we discovered. I like this. Let's hold this, because I want, for design students, as you see right here, we have a family around a screen. Drinking Coca-Cola, everyone's watching one program, very different. So we talk about let's just use a hypey word, metaverse, the big Buick is a metaverse. You're riding around it. Mm-hmm. Not that different from, quite a bit different, but not different from your clickbait on TikTok. You're going nowhere. You go down into the rabbit hole, and I do, and I wake up 30 minutes later, so what did I just do? What happened there? I just lost 30 minutes.
Yeah,
with
no result.
I learned about Johnny Depp's divorce. I learned about, and I like talking about politics of identity only like chess pieces, because we live in a malleable culture, and this big, what do they call it? A mandatory heterosexuality that we thought out of Eisenhower was not really the case in pockets. The pervade, and Nixon uses called about the silent majority. It's like, no, 90% of the people disagreed with the Vietnam War. People pull these things out of their butts and saying that, it's because of the identity. Let's talk about, just briefly, as you said, like cliche Eisenhower, the big old Buick Cadillac, I know my grandfather drove Buicks too. He was a surgeon and liked his big Buicks, and it bought my grandmother little Opals. I don't know why. Anyway, so the car is metaverse. We're going nowhere fast. Mm-hmm. That idea, and let's transpose this and maintain the idea of abdication, property, limits, borders, identities. We've got the 3 daughters. They're daughters, like Elizabeth.
Right.
When we think of the English Empire and the Cape, talk about politics of identity, the names that come up, and perhaps the most effective royalty were Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria.
Exactly.
I mean, Elizabeth reigned 40 years, effective, compared to the paltry family now, which is just like a parasitic annoyance that shows up in the page 6 or whatever, the tabloids.
Yeah, she was running the show.
So we have the Victoria. So let's talk about the car for a moment. The car is a design element. We're projecting. We'll come to film versions of this, but we're projecting images from wonderful old documentaries. They're not really, they're kind of promotional or long advertisements for Ford and Buick and whatever, unabashed, room space, door space, different design things, comparing them to Chryslers, and Rick and I are looking at it like, what's the difference? Wow, what? Talk about the car, a commodity. Oh, and you want to talk about your father, the one scene about him getting stuck on the dirt pile with the Buick, but being drunk as a skunk.
Right.
It seemed to be, and we were following the Germans with their Autobahn. Eisenhower said with Robert Moses, we need that too.
Exactly.
The freeways to get people out to the kind of sexist, racist space of the suburbs. We need the men to think about, clearly, the men as an army put butts in seats where there were once bombs in seats. They built butts in seats for the airline industry. Frank Sinatra's Come Fly With Me, the old album, you're talking about just go, travel, go, be a tourist. We need people to expend in transportation. The fantastically expensive interstate system that's just still a marvel, maybe unrivaled in the whole world. Maybe China's coming close now. But explain this big old ostentatious dinosaur car, which had a gigantic V8 engine. It could go fast, dangerous. You said there used to be a bar area in the glove compartment.
Yeah, you could literally bring down your glove compartment and it would be like a little drinks counter, and people would have their little bar there.
Just like you see in the TV show Mad Men, the guys sitting around for lunch, the 3-martini lunch, but he's putting vodka in milk and drinking it at work.
And every office, every house, every rec room and every car had a bar, effectively. And it became this place to sort of, and this is interesting because I would argue that people were not alcoholic till after World War II. In other words, the idea of alcoholism and self-medication came out of the traumas of war and PTSD of a lot of these guys, and they brought this into this kind of Levittown middle-class reality. So they basically had to co-opt that and say, you have the cliched image of the wife in the dress and the June Cleaver, Leave It to Beaver, woman with the pearls that has a drink waiting for her husband as he walks through the door. You know what I mean? This idea and he's already had about 5 of these at the office, for his 3-martini lunch and just all day long just to get through.
Which Simone de Beauvoir had written The Second Sex in, I think, the late 40s. Right. This was written in French, and so it's trickling over to America with the intelligentsia. Betty Friedan, a Smith graduate, wrote Feminine Mystique, or is it the other way around? I forget it, but those two were first wave feminism.
Yeah, Simone de Beauvoir, Second Sex.
Second Sex. So it's not, there's no Oprah, there's no kind of like feminism light going around the radios or TVs at the time. Well, we talk about Mary Tyler Moore or other figure, Donna Reed, who's actually a very active lefty who was supposed to represent the good housewife, but she protested the Vietnam War. So we find Freakonomics, gang. We find these freaky counter things to this so-called dominant idea of basically the returning male soldiers were made soldiers for commerce.
Right. Exactly.
And just like women worked in munitions, factory works, a lot of them love the autonomy. We see cities like Detroit, Buffalo, all the old Rust Belt cities actually took a nosedive after the women left.
Exactly. And the irony of that is that here they were like working and autonomous while men were off to war, and then when they returned, they were thrown right out of those jobs. Men replaced them, and they went right back into the kitchen. So you have this schizophrenic thing for women, especially, where they're going from one reality of autonomy to back to sort of the cookie cutter housewife role, and sort of locked into their house and their kitchen as another metaverse for them. As a place where
the kitchen as a metaverse.
Yeah.
Because, gang, I'm going to build these VR rooms that we might present this piece as an installation in the beginning. On everyone's cell phone, they can enter into these spaces and these rabbit holes and these different. Rick and I are playing with non-linear narratives, which still challenges us to find the catharsis moment in this. So we want to create these realities in these little spatial I/O, allows 30 people at a time with their cell phones to enter into these spaces. So that's one concept that we're going to try. This is a wonderful thing because it's an experiment. We have through Theater Lab Orieto, this wonderful little experiment here. We're trying to find these meta spaces, the metaverse spaces. Excuse me for using that hypey word, but everyone gets it. Like, you use the word NFT, and a lot of older people don't even know what it is, but kids go like, okay, I know it. That's a reality. So we saw in 46, 47, Simone de Beauvoir. Wasn't until the 60s that Betty Friedan and the American first wave feminists take off. But we had things like, there's a couple books on these large groups of industrial women who actually formed these so-called lesbian tribes in Buffalo, and they would hang out. In addition, we have more or less, let's just call them the beats in 46, 47. Men returned to the bars and said, what was that all about? We just want to hang out. Like Jack Kerouac is the reason why On the Road was so popular, is that it hit a chord.
Right.
It hit a
drop out. And
neither capitalism or communism. We're Taoist. We want the middle way.
Speaking of the car as freedom, that's Kerouac's thing, right? On the road, they're in the car crossing the United States. But here's the difference, or at least the thing that Kerouac was pushing against in the Beats, was this notion of where now the car as metaverse has now become a freedom of and brings back the individuality of, in this case, of the middle-class guy who literally is locked into his Levittown world, and then this car actually, but they're still not going anywhere. On the road's not about getting to a specific destination, it's about just being on the road.
Being on the road,
literally,
seeing
but not
what you're
being
going to
locked
experience.
into that.
Get your kicks on Route 66.
Whatever those kicks were.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know.
And basically, just like Freud, Reich, all these people transposed to America. I love that saying in that movie about Jung and Freud, a couple of Cronenberg. He said, in order to give them an affliction.
And
so suddenly they're aware of the subconscious. The car is a part of the subconscious. Right. You travel just to see. Kerouac talks about meeting pretty girls with Neil Cassidy, but the climax is they go to Mexico as a paradise. It's like, here are a bunch of natural, hardworking, the kind of like the noble savages. They go down when they're really the savages. Right. And Jack Kerouac gets dysentery bad. It's so hot. They're sleeping on top of the car, and he wakes up. He goes off to do whatever. Wakes up in the morning, and Jack Cassidy is gone. Right. Jack Cassidy, his buddy, his friend,
Neil
Cassidy, Jack Kerouac, leaves him. And that's kind of the climax of the book. They're crossing the country multiple times from New York City, and in the end, his friend betrays him when he's down with dysentery. So could we explain the betrayal of the car as a space?
Well, I want to go back to one thing that we talked about, this notion of built-in obsolescence too, because the car was built, and this we were just talking about Fordism, and the notion of the factory is a place, well, two things. The car itself becomes obsolete and its parts have to be replaced constantly.
Right.
And the second part is the people who buy them are also become obsolescent. And so their function in war is now no longer a thing. And now that built-in obsolescence, they've now brought to the idea of the office.
Just quickly, gang, we want to make this piece very, very, very contemporary. I'm reading a book, a great book on future histories, which Lizzie, I forget, Australian philosopher, journalist, writing. She said the next thing to become obsolete are truckers. And through the Google self-driving car. But it's unnecessary, but it was, as she said, it was the last place an unskilled laborer could get a good wage.
Right.
And now that's disappearing.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why we have this backlash from especially working class white America being quote unquote replaced. They've become obsolete because that way of life is obsolete, not because they're obsolete.
Or not because, Mexicans are taking their jobs.
No,
it's just like
that way of life
technology is going like,
gone.
okay, now that's gone. Google can do it better.
Yeah.
We can cut down on the 40,000 deaths on the highway. Yeah. In the old days, it must have been 40, 50, 60,000.
I mean, even the soldier himself has been replaced by the drone. I mean,
we talked about that. Our poor Russian colleagues, men, getting fried to death. 15,000 of them in a $20 million tank, but hit by a $100,000 drone.
And we know full well that they don't need those tanks. That's just a show of force. It has nothing to do with
boots on the ground.
We don't need to be fighting these
World War II battles.
Yeah, but we're doing it as a show, or they're doing it, I should say. Russians are doing this as a show to show strength, to show power, to show like the end of World War II. But also
show, as a friend of mine said, they're number 2 in profits from war machines.
Exactly, and to show that this is what we have and this is how we're spending our money. And don't fuck with us. It's like at the end of World War II. We actually dropped atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and then leveled Dresden, Germany, for absolutely no reason but other than as a show of what these war machines could do. The irony that we are the only country that's ever used a weapon of mass destruction, and yet we're always saying, oh, Pakistan, India, Russia, Israel, China, France, these places are, Pakistan's going to use these weapons of mass destruction. We already did it. And for no reason other than to show dominance and to show off our stuff that we made and we paid for. And
to realize these countries, I think it's America. So we want to keep this piece very, very contemporary and elicit. To me, I'm a geek. Seeing plays and drama are about debate. It's not shutting down debate. Yeah. This is not a play about the male narrative. This is a play about narratives in a historical context.
Exactly.
So we have this case where America's first in arms production, and they brag about it on the field of Ukraine. It's like, stop the bragging, man. At this point, we got to allow the Russians, who are number 2 in arms sales, and they saw how dismally their machines worked on the field. Yeah. France is 3. Germany's now the 4th biggest, I heard. They're rearming too, as well as Japan. So we have, we have this Faustian culture, Rick, where everything we do, including the big old car, which is burning gas, which creates greenhouse effects, war production as a way of bolstering up the economies of the Rust Belts. The town I live in now, Bridgeport, was built by war production.
Exactly.
Remington cartridges were 80% of the market of the world for cartridges.
Exactly.
So one of the bigger questions to get it out of the politics of identity, could we, should we ever leave a war economy? What did the metaverse of the car represent? also the kind of, I know my parents bought land outside of Minneapolis, which was top 10 nuclear strike cities from the Soviet Union because they had war production. Honeywell there. Let's talk about the car and the bomb and the television. As we see here, this I hope to young people, I know it sounds so old saying that, as a whole family sitting around watching one screen.
Yep.
And people are, on average, there are 2 screens per room now in the average household.
And I think the irony is what you're looking at on the screen is a reflection of what you're doing in your living room. So it's not like today when we're watching shows that are showing us other realities. This was showing you your reality and reinforcing that you made the right choices, you have the right stuff, this is how it should be. And the commercial, which we really don't have commercials anymore. We can slide by them. I don't think I've watched a commercial like actively as part of anything for a long time. We skip through them if we look at them at all. But the idea of the commercial itself was actually where the action was. To see that, and we see it at the Super Bowl, right? It's the halftime commercials that are important. Why is that?
And now we see it with
so
TikTok.
Useful? Yeah.
It's just this condensation of reality, metaverse reality, a reality down to 60 seconds.
Right.
And you see here people watching God knows what, Leave It to Beaver,
they're probably watching
Gilligan's Island, I don't know what.
Middle class family doing the same thing they're doing.
Yeah, as a reflection back to you.
Exactly. To reinforce the idea that these things that we're selling you in these commercials, which will make your life what it's supposed to be, just reinforces that. But the one thing it takes away is the autonomy, just like the war training takes away the autonomy of the individual to create sort of a army of people who are all achieving and doing the same thing. And I think it's interesting now that we're talking about meritocracy when we're talking about jobs and the economy moving forward, and a lot of people that are going out of work were part of this just continuum where they could be replaced in any factory job. The Detroit manufacturing of cars, for example, it didn't take, any person could take that job on, learn that on the job, and spend the next 30 years doing that, and then just replaced by another person.
Fantastic wage.
Yeah.
$20 an hour
but you're not
in the early 60s or whatever it was.
But you're not providing anything. Your intelligence, your skills are not coming into play. It's
as Marx said, the labor theory of value is that they are alienated from the thing they're making.
Right.
Except the Model T, where they could get over their loneliness on Sunday and go visit the farm 10 miles over. Right. Exactly. So somehow we lost this. Somehow World War II showed people at the end of overproduction and industrialism, the crash in 29, that the internal combustion engine was a force to deal with, especially when it's hooked to either war or leisure or lifestyles or cities or just a place to hang out and go nowhere, as in Jack Kerouac.
And World War II got us out of the Depression. That's how we, how we moved out of that.
Largely, and here's your Keynesian Freakonomics, largely because America was, I heard this figure, it was 4 times was producing more war material than the other top 4 combatants, not just Germany combined. I mean, this was a muscle country. I mean, people were amazed that the Germans, the whole thing about the Desert Fox Rommel sitting up watching all these American trains come in, he said, I had no idea a country could make all this stuff and ship it. This was really, I had relatives, Rick had relatives in the war. Why did it take belligerents to jumpstart an economy again in industrial economy, and then kind of take that mindset toward peace, but it was a Cold War, so it wasn't quite peace, into obedient armies of consumers. Right. And of course, those kids of the Eisenhower era, a lot of them became hippies, and then the hippies had kids, you guys out there, and then they somehow spun 180 degree from the philosophy. So Kerouac, the car was Tao. The car represented Taoism, flow. flow through this giant country, which he even talks about back then is largely consists of nothing.
Yeah, empty space.
And he lived right over here, Hell's Kitchen, Bowery, up near Columbia. They all went to boroughs and
completely opposite, by the way, the notion of the city as village, literally East Village and Greenwich Village. These ideas that we went from this village, almost like rural mentality, in a city, major city, to go back to the rural countryside where there was nothing. Like literally doing this sort of opposite as a way of freedom, but at the same time, this became its own cage, right? The car is cage, the car is
creative destruction. The car is built-in obsolescence. The car is
and also
Potlatch.
Now is it's destroying the planet in terms of carbon emissions, and it's this is still the biggest problem we have, And
Levi-Strauss and the anthropologists Levi-Strauss and Bataille said, the world is not, and I'm reading all these books, the late David Graeber wrote the great book, Bullshit Jobs and Utopia of Rules, and he's kind of a leftist anthropologist who's really criticizing the UBI of the bureaucrat, the rise of the bureaucrat. But just quickly before this is very stimulating, Bataille and Levi-Strauss are talking about, the world's not based on production. It's based on destruction.
Yep.
And Levi-Strauss goes up to the Quetico Indians, Native Americans of around Washington, Vancouver, and practically the salmon are jumping in their canoes, so it's a land of plenty. The biggest chief has a huge party and actually burns all of his possessions right in front of everyone, and therefore he becomes the big man.
Right.
I mean, he accumulates this stuff and destroys it in front of. I'm paraphrasing this. People go, no, that's not really what goes on, but let's just say it is. Following Bataille, burns it in front of everyone.
Right.
How did Lear and Earl and Eisenhower in America, dudes and doodads, amass this production, amass these material things, even non-material things like work and dreams and whatever, and burn it in front of the community.
Yeah.
How did Earl do this? Like this, it's called potlatch, is what the Quetico Indians call it. It's like, I don't know the rhythm of it or whatever. You can't keep doing this all your life. Some people do. Amass this stuff and burn it away.
Well, I think this is a really interesting point because it's essentially, this culture of building things up to destroy them. Can you imagine if the Egyptians built the pyramids thinking, we'll tear this down in 10 years and put up something else? Like, they don't think, most people, cultures don't think like that. They think in terms of like building monuments or building things that will last, that will serve communities for the future. We're actually doing it intentionally that something will not last. So this notion that a lot of these guys like Earl, this middle class guy of like 40 years old, probably in his 30s, actually when this all begins, once they've established this Levittown middle class reality, they spent their time tearing it apart and destroying it.
Well, Earl through drink,
through
and
alcoholism.
But you said,
but also through just rejecting through the Hugh Hefner Playboy reality.
Well, your mother, he had the dutiful pre-feminist wife,
right?
But he threw her away,
right? But and you literally have all these things, and then through your own suffering and PTSD. Literally destroy it.
Your own acceptance of potlatch, or as Freud says, thanatos. Yeah. That we always talk about eros, as if it's endlessly. It is, and every generation assumes that they reinvented sex or the erotic.
Right.
Baloney. What is interesting is Freud as a model. I recently had a student. Freud's disproven, and I'm like, I never knew he was proven. Whatever. It's a brilliant model. Just like Jungian concerns are too. Take it with a grain of salt, gang. But it talks about thanatos, the death impulse, which I read deeper. Right. It's just the body. Everyone's saying, we see this in old people. I'm done. Like Jack Kerouac having dysentery. I'm done with this.
And also the father, speaking of Freud, the father-son continuum, a lot of fathers don't want the son to take over and supersede them, and they become obsolete. So they self-destruct, or they destroy, they do the potlatch, right? This is what Lear does,
so
right?
That's
he gets to the
Lear
end of
and
his
Earl
time.
are doing potlatch.
Yeah, they're basically
Now
at the end of the time
gathered
saying, I'm going to
everybody.
level this joint, and this is your inheritance. Deal with it. You figure out how to make your own thing, or you just,
In a cool sense, we hit it. This potlatch, Lear, Earl. Lear assembles everyone like the Queticle chief and goes like, now that I have you all gathered,
Right.
I'm actually pretending to give away, but I'm really destroying it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
like-
literally.
and
And
like
by the way,
Earl-
that's not just like a pretend thing. To say that I'm going to take a country that is unified and break it into 3 separate
That's
countries
destroying it.
run by 3 different people who are completely philosophically, morally, ethically, completely different from each other, and to say that, okay, I'm just going to arbitrarily, you get this part, you get this part, you get this part, good luck to y'all, is literally destroying it intentionally.
Reframing this anthropologically,
Yeah.
this is a cool, because that doesn't stop. The thanatic impulse, to me is more interesting in Eros. It's like, and it's not the death impulse, it's the organism saying, I'm done, and now I'm going to destroy everything. To show you guys, I'm complete.
And also, you can't, the old cliche of you can't take it with you. In death, none of this matters anyway. None of this is going to survive you, so you might as well level it, get rid of it.
So let's just briefly talk about the Faustian, Faust who makes a deal with the devil even though he's betting there is no hell, but there is. The hell is going through the idea that there's no hell to pay. The potlatch of the greatest generation is to pollute the planet. America, all us Americans were assuming, I think at one point it was 60-70% of the natural resources of the world.
Right.
And spewing it back. So now when we have younger developed economies like China, Korea, all the other people going like, hey, it's our turn, man.
Right.
We're going to do that middle class thing you guys did.
Right.
Except we're 1.3 billion, and all the world's going, no, you can't do that. I know the West had it, but we were wrong. So it's talk about potlatch and let's keep the ideas big, gang. Potlatch and the Faustian destruction of the world.
Well, I mean,
Not our parents' generation.
Right.
Some of you grandparents' generation is like, it's my world. I'm going to squander it. I risked my ass on the beach in Normandy. I'm going to squander it.
Just the basic car, truck, factory, all literally destroying the natural world to begin with, and leaving nothing for the next generation to figure out. So if the world is to survive on this big scale, and now that we've sort of leveled it, for the next generation, either the next generation comes in and rebuilds or creates its own thing, or it
cleans up after us. Just like in the potlatch, as far as I read about the native Queticle, like everyone sits around, they're all having their drinks and watching the big man burn his. I guess it's pretty sexist, as opposed to Algonquins, which were kind of a matriarchy. And don't quote. This is all broad strokes. Don't hit me with the fine print. I like this hit. So today we could work on this notion of creative destruction.
Right.
Lear, as opposed to the ostensible viewing, oh, what a nice old guy, he's giving away his kingdom. No, he's destroying it
intentionally
in full view of everyone.
Yeah.
And he might hate his daughters. He might be well aware that you want this, ladies? Here it is.
And
Go fight for it.
One of my theories about Lear himself is that he knows full well this is not going to work, and he wants to see the infighting, and you see it on the show Succession, for example.
Right.
It's a Lear story, basically. It's this guy coming to the end of his journey, and he's like,
That's
all right,
Madoff
who
type.
am I? Yeah, and I've got 3 kids. Who is going to inherit the kingdom, right? And he plays one against the other until they're destroying each other, and then he's like, fuck you all, I'm getting rid of all of you, I'm going to level this thing to the ground.
A viper den.
Exactly, and they end up destroying each other, and he's waiting to see who the victor's going to be. That will be the successor, but he knows full well that none of these 3 will be able to do it. and that he will just prove that he is indispensable. So what he does, I don't know, I don't want to spoil their Succession, but once the show is over, its finale, I'm sorry. But the notion that he literally ends up getting a younger woman and impregnating her and creating a whole new generation.
Eros, Thanatos.
Exactly.
Now that he's done with the Thanatic
Yeah.
display,
He's destroyed his own family and replaced it with a new one, basically.
A couple of quick points, and I want to get around to making, but this is exposing the why to and the how to intersperse. Interesting fact: the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic to the early empire demanded that they make their theaters out of wood because they knew that these things were a challenge to the politics and would not. We talked about monumentality. It wasn't until later. Of course, the Colosseum was made out of stone because that's breads and circuses and
that's a whole other thing.
That's the TikTok of back then.
That's the football.
But serious theater, which we're hoping to do here, that we have expand the debate rather than contract it as like, that's my position, this is my expression, are you renting on my
parade? And by the way, the Globe Theater itself was literally made out of wood, and it was also
burned down.
But it was also began on the north side. It began in the city, and then was transferred in the middle of the night by boat. By the way, they took the timber from the old Globe Theater that was in the heart of London and brought it to the South Bank, which was the red light district, because of this very problem, is that theater was then challenging the sort of status quo of who we are as people and what
a center of debate.
Exactly.
What the hell are we doing?
And they put it literally in the red light district with the prostitutes and the bear baiting and all the vices of the time. But they literally took the beams of the theater and rebuilt it from scratch. In the middle of the night, they stole their own theater back, and then they put it on the South Bank and built it back up again. And because it was out of the city limits, they couldn't touch them legally. So these guys are basically gypsies, essentially. And the theaters always had this thing where, in the Middle Ages, you would have literally, in the Commedia dell'arte, for example, you'd have your pageant wagon, which you would bring from town to town, and then you would say your incendiary shit in front of a church, no less, usually.
And which is made of stone.
Exactly, and you would take down the doctors, the philosophers, and the religious figures in the comedies, and then when people found out about it, you would just get in your vehicle and go to the next town and do it all again. And so you're constantly kind of on the run. So this notion that debate, and this I think goes right to where we're talking about, that the commercial world, and we see it here in New York theater, the Broadway world eats up the avant-garde and the ideas, and then I would say Hamilton is a perfect example of this. In its downtown version, it's very radical. When it moves to Broadway, it actually reinforces the white supremacist
of Hamilton,
Hamilton, Jefferson, Washington, slave-owning, land-owning,
mercantilist.
These were the guys who created the so-called Declaration of Independence for men of their class. And the only
which was the upper class,
which was
basically of the colonies.
And the irony that black people are portraying white founders and we're celebrating them, forcing.
So you say from the downtown version to the uptown version with $700 tickets.
Well, there's the other thing,
We're not saying money corrupts or power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
No, it co-ops.
Power of doing, it co-ops, it morphs, it changes.
It's not about corruption, it's about changing the narrative and saying, okay, we have this really, interesting idea, but we're going to make it generic enough so that the general public can dig it.
People from Jersey can drive their cars, have a meal. The kids are all hyped about seeing Hamilton,
but I think the irony of that show is that it's supposed to be this radical retake of U.S. history, but it's not. It reinforces the founding father, that whole ethos of this was a great country built by these great white hunters. I mean, literally.
Deists, atheists, these landowning, the whole Virginia aspect to the country is
slave owning.
Well, we have this tension between the puritanical New Englanders and the kind of intellectual voluptuary Epicurean Virginians epitomized in Jefferson.
And you see it in D.C. itself. It's a city built, speaking of which, on the ancient Roman model of mausoleums, basically, of government. And this is the thing. They don't build, those weren't built to be obsolete. They were built to survive into the future, Congress and all these buildings. So it's all made out of cement and stone and steel. You know,
with a high degree of Masonic symbolism, even in the ground plan, which is saying, "Hey, gang."
Well, concluding with the Washington Monument was literally an obelisk.
You know, new boss, same old, same old. Yeah.
But this was ancient Roman thinking. You know, it was the idea of we're going to build this permanent, legacy. And then we're gonna name everything after ourselves. Washington, Jefferson. I mean, I live on Lafayette Street in New York City. I mean, these are all the people. The Clinton, Washington, all the names of all the streets in this town are either Dutch, English, or some. They're all the colonizer things. I mean, Manhattan.
Well, sometimes MLK Street. ML.
Well, that's after the fact, though. This is kind of put on top of after the fact as a kind of corrective.
Awarding the street names.
But those are always in neighborhoods that are wildly not white middle class. Either. We're not putting MLK Street or Marcus Garvey Boulevard.
Which is gentrified.
Yeah, but that's because the gentrifiers have taken it over, and that's the only reason.
Right.
But we're only celebrating those things in certain areas, and we made sure that they were on the outskirts of town, not in the center of town. There's no Martin Luther King Boulevard here in Manhattan.
Right.
There's no Marcus Garvey Boulevard. There's no.
Yeah.
It's
awarded out in Brooklyn until it all becomes
Avenue of the Americas, for God's sake.
Will be gentrified and then renamed something. In conclusion, gang, this is very fruitful, and I'm sure this is a 100-level class. So I said, "Hey, man, you guys are all over the place for a 100-level class. I just want to know how to ... I want to know how to make a device piece. I want to know what the theater is about." And this is what I want to say. Rick and I are curious individuals. We'll pull from, and usually a young person will go like, how can you pull from left field and then right field and talk about economics and talk about narratives and talk, because it's a debate. This is not to make anyone feel stupid.
Right.
It's
or right or wrong.
It's to make you feel curious.
Yeah.
That I know the first time I read Jan Kotz's book, Shakespeare Our Contemporary, I went like, holy smokes, a Stony Brook professor. When he was comparing Lear to the 50s existentialists, I went like,
to Samuel
that's
Beckett.
It opens up the world. So it's not to obscure. I often get this as like, just make it clear. What do you want? No, what do you want? What do you want when you come in to see theater as debate? I mean, we've forgotten that.
Right.
Because of all our special interests and our little feedback loop in a group, and are you this? Why are you going to that play if you're this? And it's one of the, especially after COVID, one of the last public places where we can come in, commercialism hopefully down to a minimum, special interests down to a minimum, and someone can see new ideas or old ideas reworked in a new way. And we want to telescope this from Socrates, Socrates, the biggest gadfly in the Western history, the first school, lecturing between tanners and prostitutes, in his sandals, just traipsing around the agora. And then go to Shakespeare's world, where a reluctant empire is going, well, I guess we're in the driver's seat now. But
also doing the same debate amongst prostitutes and
the working people going over and saying, hey man, what is interesting, during the late 17th century in England, some of the first constructions of the police in the world, and it was, according to Lizzie O'Shea, very interesting book, it was to police City Island, where all of the wealth from India, from the new empire, was brought in. So was the labor from the towns, and actually the labor was stealing things from the boat, just because they thought, well, it's here now, and we'll unload the boats. But I like that. I like the tea from China. I like, and so the police as a concept are constructed for two ends: to police robbing from the empire, but also to expand and define the role of the police. Before this, they had soldiers. So if there was insurrection, they just sent the soldiers in and shot people, and then the idea of the police being creators of the law with boots on the ground, definitions, but also policing what the empire brings in.
Yeah.
So something might happen in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, and there's that saying that one day those same weapons, the drones or whatever, we don't need drones when everyone has a cell phone in their pocket, that one day it shows up to police. The whole idea of the armories in New York are principally to put down urban insurrections. Right. They're always built on hills, they're massive, Absolutely. They're training grounds, and they're the elephant in the room. It's like, why do we need these armories? What's going on here? After the Paris Commune. So this is wonderful. So gang, the process is this. It's complicated, it's messy, but hopefully it's interesting. It's always interesting. Just give me the keys. Just tell me what to do. Yeah, I know that. We're doing it here. We're trying out ideas. The car is Metaverse. I've got 4 or 5 projectors in the room. I've got things like webcams. We have this VR, the Oculus Rift, that we might be extraneous to this production, but we're throwing it in to talk about non-linear narratives, and maybe this is a rabbit hole. The idea of using on the audience's cell phone spatial I/O as going into these rooms, such as the car, the photo studio, the Globe Theater. We're creating a Globe Theater inside these things. Are ways, again, like Simon McBurney, better ways to tell a story, and we'll probably begin a method of subtracting these elements after a while as it refines. So this has been wonderful, Rick. We are at a wonderful hour, 50 minutes, and see you soon, gang.
All right, guys,
Ciao.
thanks.